Untitled Chat video. My name's Luci and I'm so glad you could join me today. Today we're going to be talking about drugs. Yep, no, not the straight ones, not even the prescribed ones. We're talking about the 4 primary drugs of the brain, or at least 4 of the main components that are responsible for your moods and how you respond and how you react to things. Today we're talking about dopamine. Now, like I said, dopamine is one of 4 primary drugs that are found in the brain and responsible for the day-to-day runnings of our business. The other drugs that we'll be talking about in later videos are serotonin, endorphins, oxytocin. But today's video is focusing exclusively on dopamine. Later on, we'll talk about the other drugs in different videos, and then we'll get onto a series about how these interact and what they do for your brain when they're shooting around through your body and doing their job. So dopamine is known as the happiness drug. However, this is actually a bit of a misnomer because it's not actually responsible for happiness, as it is more about anticipation. Dopamine is a drug that is primarily responsible for those feelings of anticipation and looking forward to something. It is one of the primary pleasure drugs. Now, it's a neurotransmitter. This means that it sends messages between your nerve cells. Its primary role is in the pleasure center of the brain. Although, interestingly, it's actually found 80% in the gut. So, that's got really interesting ramifications for the rest of your health and how your health of your body impacts the way that your brain works. When dopamine levels are out of whack or even in regulation, they have a huge effect on things like mood, motivation, how you sleep, how you feel, your pain center, your pleasure center, even have an effect on things like your blood rate and how well your blood's flowing and your heart rate. Dopamine affects your kidney functions, it affects your nausea and vomiting response, it affects your attention, your pain responses, and movement. Now, the role of dopamine in mental health is incredibly important, but very hard to actually pin in how it is important. It's sort of just like this big general part of feeling good, and it's not known to be directly responsible for any of the mental health issues that do actually plague us. However, we do know that it does have some sort of role when it comes to things like schizoaffective delusions and hallucinations. We're just not quite sure of the process. There are some studies that indicate that too much dopamine in the brain actually can send you into these states, but we're not sure if that's correlation or causation. We also know that it's got a big influence on ADHD. However, we're again not exactly sure what that connection is, or if it's just a correlation as opposed to a causation. We do know that it has effects because of its levels of motivation and the mood effect of dopamine. We do know that there is an actual link there. We just don't know quite what it is. One thing that we do know for absolute certain is that dopamine has a huge impact on addiction and habits of addiction. If you were to take cocaine, for example, you are going to raise your dopamine levels way up through the roof. Now, the more often that you do this, the less that your body actually produces, meaning that you need more of the drug to get that same high, and that high is something that your body craves because it really likes the dopamine, so therefore it sets up a whole feedback loop of you need a higher dose, less dopamine, higher dose, less dopamine, higher dose, less dopamine, higher dose, less dopamine, and eventually you have a total crash and nothing makes you feel good anymore, so that even when you're sober, you just don't feel pleasure. This is one of the big impacts that addiction can have. Now, this isn't just limited to chemical addiction to, say, cocaine. This can happen through gambling and any other overly done addiction that we have in our life. It also has interesting effects on things like Parkinson's, although I say interesting in the purely scientific terms. We know that Parkinson's degenerates neurons, and we know that those neurons are massively affected by dopamine. So we know there's big connections between them, but we don't actually, again, know what's going on. But it is noted in many studies that are going on with Parkinson's that dopamine seems to be one of the key players in some of the neuro breakdowns in the body. The other interesting link when it comes to addiction is food addiction. Dopamine plays a big part in obesity. Obesity is primarily caused by overeating. Overeating is a complex issue. It's nothing simple. There are so many things out there that say, oh, well, you can just stop eating. As somebody that is obese, I can tell you right now, food addiction is the hardest addiction to give up. Anything else that you're addicted to, you can literally just cold turkey it and walk away from it, or stop it, or join a program and come down from it. When it comes to food, you are never getting away from it. You need to eat. It's a complex issue, and dopamine does us no favors in it, because all of the foods in the Western diet that are easily inaccessible, highly carb loaded, sugar loaded, fat loaded, junk food basically, set off dopamine. So we actually crave those foods specifically because of the dopamine responses that we get from them. That's what makes food addiction and obesity such a complex issue. But we'll talk more about that in another video. Medically, dopamine actually has quite a few really interesting uses. You would think that they would be directly related to mood, but they're actually not. They're more related to blood pressure and heart regulation. It's used medically to treat things like septic shock, heart and blood pressure. It can also help with poor cardio output and blood flow to the extremities. However, it is quite complicated a process. It's not fully understood, and it does require strict medical supervision for it to be successful. Dopamine also plays a part in habits that we have daily. If you're somebody that gets up and goes to the gym every day at 7 o'clock in the morning, that's because you get a little dopamine kick every time you complete that task. Adversely, if you're somebody that can't form habits successfully, dopamine is probably the reason why. You may have lowered dopamine levels that just don't connect the reward system that's normally in place for successful or even bad habits to form. Again, dopamine is a very complex structure, and we're not quite sure of the full interactions of it in the body, but we do know that there are some very set responses from it. Decreased levels of dopamine mean that we have a very hard time forming habits. On that, there are actually things that you can do to naturally boost your dopamine levels. Generally speaking, the more dopamine that you have, the more pleasure you're going to feel in life, and the more habits you can actually form. And of course, if you're controlling those habits with, say for example, bright lines, see the former video from last week, just go and watch that one up there. I'll link it above. Go and watch that. Learn about bright lines and what you can do with them, and understand that dopamine is going to help you set those in place really easily and really quickly. But there are things that you can do to increase your dopamine levels completely natural. The number one would be protein, specifically tyrosin. This seems to be a precursor to the types of proteins that are actually used to make dopamine. So it makes sense that if you increase the bioavailability of dopamines in your body, specifically ones that contain tyrosin and phenylalanine, I'll put the word up here somewhere. I don't know how to say it. It's one of those words that's on the back of chewing gum. Nobody knows how to say it, and I should do because I was affected by it for years. You can get this increase in the good protein through foods like turkey or beef or dairy, eggs or legumes. So nothing that's particularly inaccessible. So how about you look into upping your dosage of these good things so that you get a dosage of good things. You can also eat less saturated fats. In a study that was conducted on rats that had up to 50% of their diet containing saturated fats had a much lower dopamine response. Now, of course, this is a study that was done in rats and it hasn't been done on people because that would be unethical. We don't want that. However, rat brain chemistry and human brain chemistry is remarkably similar, and that's why these experiments are done on rats. What it shows is that regardless of the weight, the age, the fat percentage of the rat, its mood, blood sugar levels, or anything else, a diet consisting of heavy saturated fats lowered the dopamine reception ability in those rats. This would translate the same to humans, we're pretty sure. And it also doesn't hurt to avoid a diet that's really laden in saturated fats anyway. As I said earlier, 80% of the dopamine in your body is found in your gut. This means that your gut health has a huge impact on your brain health. Now, we've known for a long time, or at least it is becoming more known, but it's been known in circles for a long time that there is a direct relation between gut health and brain health. And probiotics seem to be the key to this. Probiotics are really misaligned in the media. They are used as another product to sell you. You get lots of people talking about prebiotics and probiotics and this yogurt and that yogurt. Probiotics are the gut flora that assist in the digestive system of the body. This system is vitally important, and it's very easy to keep it healthy. It needs lots of fiber, that you'll get from eating fresh fruit and vegetables. Lots of roughage and greens and lots of vitamin-laden foods. Highly processed foods will decrease the quality of the probiotics in your gut, regardless of what's going on. If you're taking a medication, specifically something like an antibiotic, that's going to wipe out a lot of your natural gut flora, you want to actually increase it. And I'm not going to tell you with a supplement, I'm going to tell you to go out and get kefir or water kefir. You want to have kefir because it is probably the closest to what a balanced gut bacteria should look like, because it literally is from gut bacteria originally, and now we use it to make yogurt. That sounds really gross, and I know that, but the stuff is amazing. Yogurt that is commercially produced these days is made with 2 or 3 strains of Bulgarius, acidifidas, and it's not particularly healthy for a really diverse gut system like the ones that we have. It can help, sure, but things like your cult that are 1 strain yogurts, they're not doing much for you at all. Your best bet is to eat naturally fermented foods. So what you want to have is those really good foods like kefir and natural yogurts. We're not talking sugar-laden ones, we are talking pot sets. European yogurts are a really great source when we're talking fuel milk or Mazzoni, Caspian Sea yogurt, and these sorts of things, as opposed to the old Danone or Yoplait that are barely yogurt to begin with. The next one is velvet beans. Now I'm going to have to put a link on the screen to these, or maybe pop a picture up for a minute, because I didn't actually know what they were. But a study conducted a few years ago, 250 grams of cooked velvet beans increased dopamine levels, and they lasted significantly longer than an artificial dopamine regime. Now, velvet beans are actually toxic in high quantities, and 250 grams sounds like a lot to me, so I'm not sure what a high quantity is. But I don't know anything about velvet beans, but there we go. Velvet beans apparently are a great way to increase the natural dopamine and have it last longer. The next one is you can exercise often. You hear that a lot. Doing 6 hours of yoga a week, which sounds a lot, but it actually works out to just shy of an hour a day, can leave you with elevated dopamine reception levels as well as elevated dopamine levels. Now, while the elevated dopamine levels aren't sustained for long term, they are sustained while completing the exercises and until the next session if it's done regularly enough. Any exercise is going to get the dopamine levels going. That's when they talk about things like a runner's high. That's what they're talking about. The dopamine levels just explode and they get a big old hit from it, and the brain does all wonderful things and it really likes that feeling, so you're more inclined to run again. Interestingly enough, we're actually creatures that were evolved to run, so running probably is one of the best ways to get a big old dopamine hit. The next one is sleep. I shouldn't need to tell you that one. Dopamine actually regulates a great deal of sleep, so if you have interrupted sleep, it's likely that you're going to have lowered dopamine levels. Sleep is such an important factor with overall health. It's really not surprising that good night's sleep helps increase the amount of dopamine that your brain can hold. Music. We've all heard that music is a key to the soul. At least I think that's an expression. Anyway, music can really elevate a mood. Literally. We know that classical music has direct effects on the brainwave and the brain, and it does actually increase dopamine reception in the brain to listen to classical music such as Mozart or Beethoven. This has been known for a long time, but we're not actually sure why. Music just seems to be really important to our brains and the way that we react to the daily world. So find some music that you like and listen to it for increased dopamine. The next one is that you can meditate. Meditation is a proven method of increasing the amount of dopamine and dopamine receptors in the brain over the long term. Meditation is really good for you in general. Now, the next one is sunlight. While the effects of sunlight might not directly increase the dopamine reception levels in your brain, we do know that prolonged non-exposure, and so basically when we're not in the sun, we lose capability of producing dopamine, which is a really scary fact because we spend so much of our time indoors, in offices, in our homes. We spend a lot of time away from sunlight. So one of the best things that you can do for yourself is get outside and get some vitamin D, because in this case, vitamin D stands for dopamine. So don't allow your dopamine levels to fall further than necessary just because you work in an office all day. At every break that you get, try to get out of the office building. Try to go outside of the house and get 5 minutes of sunshine. Whenever you've got a day off, make sure that you spend part of your day in the sun, just to make sure that your dopamine levels aren't drying up because you work in a job that you didn't just think is making you unhappy. It literally is. And the last method, although it's not the one that I recommend, is through supplements. I'm not a big believer in taking supplements. I don't think that most of the products sold to us under the brands of vitamins and minerals is actually bioavailable. Certainly you can get a better response from ensuring that you have a wide and varied fresh-based diet. But if you don't have access to that, or for whatever reason you aren't able to get a wide-ranging fresh-based diet and you do need to take some supplements, try to aim for niacin, B6, folate and iron. These will help your dopamine levels and your dopamine receptors by making more of the nutrients in your body bioavailable and the proteins to be able to be turned into the chemicals that are precursor to dopamine, therefore helping you increase your dopamine production. That one was a mouthful, I'm not gonna lie. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it. Basically, listen to some music, meditate, do things that you like and enjoy, get some exercise, get a bit of sunshine and eat good food, and your brain will reward you. So my name's Luci. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Every time somebody likes, comments, subscribes onto my channel, it really makes my dopamine levels shoot through the roof. I love it. Thank you for being here. I will see you next week when we are going to be talking about serotonin, an interesting drug. So we will talk again next week. This is Luci from A Good Chat, and I hope this was a good chat. Bye for now.